off by welcoming everyone to this meeting for the Camas Housing Action Plan. We really appreciate you taking some time out of your evening to hear about what we've been working on. I'm Melissa Mayu. I'm a consultant that was hired by the city to help them with this plan. Also on the meeting is my colleague, Jeremy Gray, um, and Sarah Fox with the city of Camas. Sarah, if you'd like to introduce yourself or say any welcome.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to hearing your thoughts later in the presentation.
Thanks. Yeah. So I know some of you may have been, I guess before we get started, a little bit of an overview about using Zoom. So if this is your first time with it, I know it's probably not for most people since we've been meeting virtually for a year now, but you can change your name using that participants button. If we get to the point where we have a lot of discussion and you need to raise your hand, you can use that raise hand button. You can also just physically raise your hands and we'll be able to see you. And also we'll be using the chat feature. So feel free to send questions or comments through the chat throughout the meeting. And I don't think anyone's joining by phone, but if you are, you can use *6 to mute and unmute and *9 to raise your hand. All right. Now back to our housing action plan. So I know some of you may have been following this project for a while now, but for those of you that are new to it, this is a project that the city is doing to look at how they can provide greater housing diversity, improve affordability, and improve access to opportunity for people of all incomes. It's something that's funded through the State Department of Commerce. And there are a few cities and counties throughout the city that are doing, throughout the state that are doing studies similar to this. So really looking at how we can expand what types of housing Camas offers. We're on sort of the back end of this project. So last fall, we did a lot of community engagements, a lot of data analysis, and things like that. And you can see the results of those in an existing conditions report that's on the project website now, which is letstalkcamashousing.us. But the phase that we're in now is we have some draft recommendations for what type of actions the city should take to expand its housing offerings. And we're at the point where we are presenting them to stakeholders from the city, residents, trying to get feedback from folks about what do they think about these ideas? Do they look like they're on the right track? Then after that, we'll work on finalizing that action plan and eventually having it adopted by the City Council by June. So I mentioned for this meeting, we want to focus a lot on that recommendation side of it, but I will spend a little bit of time with some background information about kind of the public engagement and data research that we did. Just to give us some background as we talk about those ideas for strategies. So public engagement activities included a couple open houses, a series of focus groups and interviews, and a public survey that was available throughout the fall of last year. And as you can see, that survey was really where we got the biggest share of responses from residents. About 300 people took it, and about 830 people visited the website. So you can get a sense of how many people have engaged with the project. Let's see. One of the things that we asked in our survey was a series of questions where we were asking folks to say whether they agreed or disagreed with different statements. And let's see, let me minimize our faces. You can see from this slide the range of responses that we got for a variety of those things. So one of the first questions asking Do you agree or disagree that the lack of affordable housing is a serious issue in Camas? And you can see that there was a variety of responses. About half of those 300 survey takers said yes, they agree or strongly agree that affordable housing is a serious issue here. And one of the things that we were looking at as we were analyzing these results were kind of how income might impact that. So we had asked in that survey for folks to share their income range. And when you look at it by those incomes, higher income households were less likely to say that affordable housing is an issue, whereas some lower income households more likely to see affordable housing as an issue. So I think you get a sense there of kind of for some of the families and individuals that might be looking for housing, might have a better sense of whether they are really able to find something affordable here at those lower income ranges. You can also see we asked for a variety of different type of households and whether they would have difficulty affording housing here. So thinking about folks who work in the city, seniors, young families. And again, we got a variety of answers, but you can see that particularly for seniors and young families, that survey respondents did not feel like they would be able to find appropriate affordable housing here. There we go. The next series of questions that we asked was kind of about housing development. And you can see again that there were a variety of responses kind of in terms of whether Camas needed more varied housing development. So one where there was more agreement was this statement about Camas being cautious that new housing development kind of fit in with the existing community character. So I think that that's probably a consideration that we took in mind as we were developing strategies and that we would anticipate kind of the city continuing to keep in mind as it's looking at new housing options going forward. Talking about different types of housing that people would like to see here, these are some of the things that we heard either through the surveys, meetings, or interviews. That people were particularly interested in starter homes. There's kind of if you were a kid that lived here and moved away and was wanting to come back as a young family, you would probably have some difficulty finding a first time homebuyer opportunity here. We also heard about apartments and condos. I think particularly in relation to downtown, that would be something that would be pretty vital to keeping the downtown lively, and that there's some opportunity for more apartments and condos there. We heard about accessory dwelling units and that those could be an option for increasing housing types and providing some affordable housing. And we also heard about housing for seniors and housing that would be accessible for people with disabilities, that there were not a lot of options here right now. So this is a pretty quick summary of the input that we got. And again, if you want to delve into that further, I would suggest looking at that existing conditions report online. Let's see. A little bit of background about the housing data that we looked at. And I think particularly maybe pertinent to this conversation is looking at housing costs. You can see there, looking at home values in Camas over the last 10 years, that they've increased pretty considerably. That top of end of the range, so the 65th percentile home value was about $750,000, so pretty high. And even at the bottom of the market, that $400,000 35th percentile is a pretty significant barrier, particularly if you are thinking about maybe someone looking to downsize to a smaller home or first-time home buyers, that 400,000 number is would still be a pretty big hurdle in order to afford to buy a home here. On the rental side, these were results from a survey that the Washington Center for Real Estate Research did, particularly for cities and counties that are doing a project like this. So, a survey of what their multifamily rents are. And you can see that in Camas, the average for a 2-bedroom is around $1,400 a month, and for a 3-bedroom, around $1,800 a month. So for some of those lower income households, I think a pretty big affordability barrier, particularly if you are maybe a family that's going to need a couple bedrooms or 3 bedrooms, looking at some significant housing costs. And that was kind of one of the last things that I wanted to share was this is data about how many households in the city are spending more than 30% of their income on housing. That's something that the US Department of Housing and Urban Development and kind of the housing industry has as a standard for affordable housing, 30% of your income. So about 40% or about 2 out of 5 renters in Camas are spending more than that. And the vast majority of those folks who are having difficulty affording their home have incomes under 80% of the area median. So this is not households that have money but are choosing to live in expensive housing. This is kind of low and moderate income folks that are not able to find something they can afford here. For owners, that number is a little lower, but you can see that there are still a pretty significant share of folks who are having difficulty affording housing here. About 1 out of 5 owners are spending more than 30% of their income. And again, you can see that most of those folks, 76%, have incomes under that 80% of the area median. So these are the types of things that we are trying to think about strategies to overcome. How can we have more diverse housing types? How can we increase affordability to better serve the needs of folks here? And I'll turn it over to my colleague Jeremy now to go over some of our recommendations.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Yeah, I'm going to go and walk us through a few of our recommendations, particularly related to zoning. That's one aspect of the recommendations that we are making, and there are some other types as well that Melissa will talk more about in a little bit. So the first one is a concept called upzoning. And with upzoning, what we're talking about is with the existing zoning districts that the city has, increasing the level of density that is allowed in each of those. So it's not changing anybody's zoning from one type to another, but instead changing some of the standards that apply within those zoning districts. So if we're talking about ways to increase density in the city of Camas, this is one of the ways to do that. And so what we would recommend is kind of an overall increase of the minimum net densities that are required across all the city's residential zones. Right now, Camas's comprehensive plan calls for a goal as an average of 6 units per acre. We would encourage the city to move toward a minimum of 6 units per acre rather than that being the average. So right now, that number varies quite a bit, and you're probably not going to get to 6 units an acre in your least dense zoning districts. That might not be reasonable, but I think it does make sense as a goal to move toward and kind of step everything toward. So you can see that picture is an example of a triplex that is, I think, really well done, and it's massed to look like a single family home. But in fact, that's a 3-unit dwelling. With that sort of housing type, and this is an example from elsewhere in Washington, but they're getting 9.3 units per acre with that type housing. Right now, I think with the city's densest zoning district currently, the most you could do is 7.2 units per acre. So housing of that density that you see in the picture wouldn't be permitted in any of the current single family zoning districts in the city. The kind of another aspect to this upzoning is, let's see. Melissa, could you go back one, I think? Oh, no, that's right. So one other part of this is changing some of the standards in the mixed use and the downtown commercial zoning districts. Right now, these two districts that the city has are some of the most permissive in terms of housing diversity and density. And so tweaking, I think, really around the edges, some of the requirements within these districts can open up more housing opportunities within these. So for example, allowing threeplexes, fourplexes, row houses by right in mixed use zones. So currently in a mixed use zone, if you wanted to put let's say a duplex or row houses maybe in a mixed use zone, that would be a conditional use. And so you'd have to apply to the city for a permit to do that. The permit process can cause some uncertainty or raises uncertainty if you are a developer. You might invest money in a property only to find out that you don't get the permit that you're looking for. It increases cost for a developer too. So allowing those uses by right kind of removes some of that uncertainty and cost. There's also a picture here that's an example. Thanks. This picture right now in the downtown commercial, housing is allowed, but not on the ground floor. And so this is an example of ground floor retail, ground floor commercial, but on the side street, you see there to the left side of that picture, there's still residential in the ground floor. And so certainly you want to maintain a commercial character in your downtown commercial district, but there might be chances to open up a little bit for more housing use by allowing it on side streets. Let's see, in that next example, this one is talking about a diversity of housing types and how to better incorporate some of these other housing types that are growing in popularity into the city's housing mix. So things like cottage developments, courtyard apartments, tiny homes, cluster developments, these are things that I think nationally people are paying more attention to. It's certainly housing types that we've heard more about in some of our consultations with people here in Camas. So amending some of the zoning districts here again that currently exist to specifically allow some of these types. They would still have to meet the density and the dimension standards, dimensional standards, meaning like lot size requirements, setback requirements, and things of that sort. But as long as a development that was a cottage home or a duplex or a triplex was meeting those, it could be allowed in one of the city's existing residential districts. So making that an express permit rather than having to go through the conditional use permit process on those. I had a note here too about the conditional use permitting that I was talking about earlier about uncertainty, but also cost. I believe a conditional use permit starts at about $3,300 plus some per unit fees on top of that. So again, just that's one more cost that anybody who's developing housing would have to incur rather than something that the zoning code allows outright. All right. I think this next one has a couple of examples just to illustrate for you some other examples of these housing types. So on this slide, you're seeing a couple of cottage cluster developments. So you can see that you're getting these are pretty small lot sizes. They're fairly dense. but they are nice looking, and you still have that open space. And I know that that was an important component of the character of Camas for many of the people that we talked with during this process. I think another example for you here, yeah, we've got some a duplex example, or a couple of those, and then also some courtyard apartments. I think, a lot of times when we talk about a duplex, there might be certain ideas that we have in mind about how a duplex looks, and I bet it's not like one of these. These are, I think they're really well executed. For the most part, they really look like a single family home, but they just have two front doors on them. And so they fit in, or tend to fit in very nicely in a single family neighborhood. They don't look out of place. They're not out of scale. They still have really nice design and finishes, yet you have just doubled kind of the capacity of the lots that they're on. And then one other aspect that we wanted to talk some about related to zoning is inclusionary zoning. So a lot of the zoning strategies that we have talked about to this point relate to ways to increase the number of housing units in the city. They may not necessarily increase affordable housing, although somehow, smaller housing types may tend to be affordable or more affordable than average. But you could also very well, result in some pretty expensive townhomes, condos, things like that, that aren't necessarily more affordable. An inclusionary zoning ordinance is one way to specifically go for that affordability piece. Under something like this, and it can be a voluntary or a mandatory program. Under a voluntary program, the city might offer some incentive. And so a developer who wants to build housing might get a higher density in exchange for setting aside some number of units that would be affordable. They could certainly choose to, maintain density at the currently allowed levels and forego having to set aside any units. It would be up to them. You could make it mandatory, in which case the city wouldn't issue a permit unless the developer did set aside some number of units as affordable housing. Or you could also allow for a developer to pay an in lieu fee. So if they wanted to, or chose not to include those set aside units, they could instead pay into a fee. The city could accumulate those funds and use them to support affordable housing development elsewhere. The example there at the bottom, I think, is a pretty good one and a handy way to look at it. So you can see currently allowed, or a proposal for a 58,000 square foot development that's going to contain 58 market rate units. So in this example, the jurisdiction is allowed a 14% density bonus. So they've gone from 58,000 square feet to 66,000 square feet. It's a larger and denser development type. In exchange for that increase in density, though, the community has required that they set aside 6 units that would be affordable housing. So what they get is totally 8 more units out of the development. So it had been 58 units, now it's 66 units. And 6 of those units are set aside as affordable housing. And so you can, you might not require this on, unless somebody is building maybe 10 units or 8 units or more, something like that. It wouldn't apply to, a single family development project necessarily. And you can also scale the project, and those, it could be a density bonus. There are other concessions. You see some examples listed there that a city might put out there as an incentive to get a developer to set aside those affordable units. You could offer a higher density bonus if they set aside, in this example, it's 10%, but maybe it's a higher density bonus if they set aside 15%. You could use those bonuses and concessions to also encourage a deeper targeting. Maybe the set aside units are for moderate income families, or maybe we'll give you a bigger density bonus if it's for lower income families. So there are different ways, lots of ways that this can be configured. but it is used successfully in many other communities. A newer concept, but I think something that could be helpful in Camas.
Thanks, Jeremy. And I will go through a couple other of our strategy ideas, and then we'll open it up for a discussion. I know we've had a little bit of a discussion going on in the chat already, but we can talk about some of those ideas as well. So in addition to some of the zoning strategies that Jeremy talked about, we are also considering ways that the city can increase, kind of develop affordable housing resources. So one of those might be partnerships with affordable or multifamily developers, particularly tax credit developers. So low-income housing tax credits are one of the biggest ways that new affordable housing is built. Each year, developers apply to the state in a competitive process to try and receive tax credits that will help fund affordable housing development. So this recommendation would kind of involve the city taking a more active role in recruiting some tax credit developers to Camas. That may just be things like kind of building dialogue with them. It may be things that like looking at ways the city may be able to help with development, whether that's maybe something along the lines of infrastructure assistance or waivers to kind of permitting or development charges, things like that. And in addition to kind of private market developers, working with something like the Vancouver Housing Authority to increase the number of units of affordable housing here would be another option. In addition to looking at those partnerships, the city could also look at ways to kind of build resources for affordable housing. So maybe that's looking at how publicly owned land might be able to be used towards improving housing affordability. Or looking at ways to develop some kind of local sustainable funding source that would help towards affordability. That may be something like the in lieu fees for an inclusionary zoning ordinance that Jeremy mentioned earlier. There are other cities that do things like a construction tax, where a portion of that would go towards funding affordable housing. So there are a variety of approaches the city could look at. Another thing that I think we heard a good bit about as we were talking with stakeholders is the need to really develop more community conversations around housing, and particularly why housing matters in Camas. Why does it matter that there's kind of a place for everyone here? Looking at ways that housing connects with things like schools, jobs, transportation, and kind of just developing more support for different types of housing and different price ranges than there might be now. I think particularly kind of as we, a lot of times the way places kind of talk about this is that if you look at who works here, are they able to afford housing in Camas, or kind of the person that you're interacting with every day in Camas, are they able to afford to live here, or are they having to live somewhere else? So I think some ways that the city can kind of build those conversations will be important, almost as important as kind of some of the more maybe technical approaches that it might take over the next several years. And then maybe a little bit along those lines, one of the recommendations that we would have is to better communicate some of the existing resources for affordable housing. So that may be just packaging and advertising kind of what is available now. Camas Ridge is an affordable housing development that's here now. There's also down payment assistance that would be available through the state. The city could host home buyer education events or things like that. And maybe this is a sample from another city in Oregon, but develop kind of a web page that would provide this information and just communicate that this is something we care about as a city. We're interested in getting this information out to our residents or other folks that might be interested in it. So that was a kind of quick overview of what we've been working on and where this project is headed. You can visit letstalkcamashousing.us, and there's quite a few avenues on there to kind of keep the conversation going, and we would encourage you to leave your thoughts there. Also, you can sign up to get updates about the project there. So we will be taking this plan in front of the Planning Commission. Let's see, is it April 20th? That Tuesday? Yeah, April 20th.
20th.
Yeah, Tuesday, April 20th. So certainly if you would like to come to that meeting, we will have the information up there about it. So you can kind of continue to follow this progress. With that, I will thank everyone for coming and close the meeting. We really appreciate all of your thoughts.